Assalamu alaikum everybody. We're going to start today's program with Dua Kumail recited by Zainab.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك عليه اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته اللهم عظم بلائي وافرط بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي يا سيدي، فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك، أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي، أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك، وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحجة علي في جميع ذلك، ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شدي وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي، يا من بدا خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمك والسالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي. أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك، وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك، ولهج به لساني من ذكرك، واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات، أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته، أو تبعد من أدنيته، أو تشرد من آويته، أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك مادحة، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة، وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن بك، ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم. يا ربي، وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها، وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثوه، يسير بقاؤه، قصير مدته. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل العقوى المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه، ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك. وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي، فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو، ولما منها أضج وأبكي؟ لأليم العذاب وشدته، أم لطول البلاء ومدته؟ فلئن صيرتني في العقوبات مع أعدائك، وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك، وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك، فكيف أصبر على فراقك؟ وحبني صبرت على حر نارك، فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك؟ أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك؟ فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا، لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين، ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته، وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته، وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي. فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تعلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رباه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عبته منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات، ما ذلك الظن بك، ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبح لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك قسمت وأن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو ظهرته وكل سيئة نمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع الجوارح، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير تنزله أو إحسان تفضله أو بر تنشره أو رزق تبسطه أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي في الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، قو على خدمتك جوارحي واشتد على العزيمة جوارحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المبادرين واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وادنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرده، ومن كادني فكيد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك، وجد لي بجودك وعاطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك مطيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وعقلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي، وإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة، فإليك يا ربي نسبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، فبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء. يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النقم، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآله وافعل به ما أنت أهله. وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد عليه وآله السلام.
We'll now have Yasin recited by Bilal.
Salaat. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب عليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردن الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيوب ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملت أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشاء نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلهي وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في السور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محصرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتاز اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسكناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مزيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمره ننكس في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه شعرا وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقناه لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلية لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محصرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأكثر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول لهم كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات.
We'll continue the program with Shaykh Zoheir Esmail speaking about Mulla Sadra. Dr. Zoheir Esmail studied accounting and finance at the LSE before qualifying as a chartered accountant. Thereafter, he began pursuing full-time studies in the Islamic Seminaries of Syria and London, before moving to Qum, where he has spent the last decade studying and teaching. He was awarded a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Exeter with a thesis title of Between Philosophy and Irfan, Interpreting Mulla Sadra from the Qajars to Post-Revolutionary Iran. He'll continue his topic on Sadran psychological frameworks. Please welcome him with a loud salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين صلاة على محمد وآل محمد Alhamdulillah, we begin by thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all the copious and abundant blessings that He always bestows upon us. And before I start, I just have to make a small correction from yesterday. In the Museebah, I said I was going to recite from Kitab al-Irshad, and when I opened the book, I read from the wrong side of the page and read for you the account from At-Tabari, but the accounts were very close, so just to make that clarification. Continuing our topic on a Sadrian framework, we now move to what is the fruit of this framework. And that is the discussion of the intellect, because it is really the intellect that distinguishes us as human beings. And the intellect is something that is again graded. The intellect is something that develops. As we have on that slide there, the intellect is the realization of the soul. The soul gives us the potential to become truly intelligent beings. And that is what it means for a personality to become actualized, when the intellect is fully actualized. Of course, there is an aspect of intellect that is actualized. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to have any kind of discussion. As we'll see right now, the intellect is split into two categories. One is the practical intellect, and one is the theoretical intellect. But the more the capacity in the soul goes closer to perfection, the greater the faculty of intellect. And like we discussed in our lectures a couple of years ago, the intellect, as it's described in the scriptural sources, is that by which Allah is worshipped and by which heaven is attained. And hopefully when we look at these types of intellect and what examples Mulla Sadra is giving, what are the steps of improving the intellect, we'll see very clearly why that faculty results in those two things, that by which God is worshipped and heaven is attained. So let's first look at stages of the practical intellect. The practical intellect is the intellect that we use to do things. It is the pragmatic intellect, the intellect that we use for decision making, the intellect that we use for morality. This is the practical intellect, what we should and what we shouldn't do. So Mulla Sadra, when he's looking at the stages, how does a person's practical intellect move from being the practical intellect within which we do the normal things that we do every day, things like driving, things like cooking, and things like that, making our day-to-day decisions, deciding whether to buy something, and so on and so forth. How do we improve this practical intellect, and what are the perfections that this practical intellect goes through? Well, the first thing is practicing religion. Practicing religion is a way in which the practical intellect develops. Because what we do when we practice religion is we take positive steps towards that by which we will be successful. We'll be successful not only in our day-to-day lives, but we'll also be successful in our spiritual life. So when someone practices religion, it betrays an understanding. It betrays an understanding that there is more. And so when they take those steps, that practical intellect itself increases. As we go through our day-to-day practice of the laws of Islam, laws of our religion, it helps us to create the potential to understand further. It helps us also to lay a basis to practice further as well. So this is the very basic, and the very basis from which we can develop further. And this also goes back to many discussions that we've had before about the outward and the inward of religion. For us to progress into the inward, we have to begin with the outward. And linking this back to what we were talking about yesterday in terms of the levels of the soul, because the soul is affected by the body, the kind of practices that we need to have to meaningfully affect the soul have to start with the body. You have to do something with your body to get somewhere with your spirit. So this is the first level. We need to have a basic level of practice. And of course, we believe that the religion of Islam has taught us the most elevated practices. If we take our salah, for example, our salah is a daily practice of connecting to the metaphysical. If we take our time period when we have Shahr Ramadan, that is a focused period where we use our body to clarify and to make beautiful our souls. And we all experience that when we go through the month of Ramadan and we come to the end of the month of Ramadan, we can feel that elation within us. What did we do? We stopped some things, some food, some drink, for a certain period of time, but it had a profound effect. It had a profound effect because it was done at the right time and in the right way. If you're to think about the rituals, sometimes I do this. Maybe you would do this too. I put myself in the position of someone who was making a religion. Say I wanted to guide as many human beings as I could to salvation. What kind of practices would I make them do? Would I make them meditate? Would I, make them give food? What kind of program would I give to them so that they could live a normal life, but also experience spiritual elation and spiritual progression? And every time I think about this, when I look at the practices that Islam has given us, I'm always bewildered, because I find these practices so practical and so effective, especially when I think of practices like Salah. Salah for me is, when I look at spiritual practices across religions, is one of those things that really stands out to me, because it's like an exercise that you do just for a little while, every single day. But the cumulative effect of that small thing every day is profound. It is so profound that, of course, in hadith about Salah, we have that Salah is the middle tent pole of our actions. When you're building a tent, I know now you have a whole kit and you have, all these things that you put in, but if you like, a basic tent is a pole and a sheet, and maybe some pins to pin around. Salah is like that middle tent pole. If you don't have that pole, you don't have a tent. In the same way, when we hear about Salah and the example that is given, Salah is like the middle tent pole of your actions. Without Salah, there's nothing else. Right? So that practice, which is so small, becomes the foundation for something amazing in the next life, but also in this life. Because the next life is a reflection of this life. So a person who practices religion, who understands the way the world works and therefore practices something, is somebody who has a practical intellect. They are working just like a person who is aware of finance doesn't spend all their money. They save some, because they know in 2 years' time their car is going to need, some kind of repair or needs to be renewed. They know, for example, at the end of a certain month, they have X and Y expenses. Someone with a practical intellect is always aware of those things that are coming up and those things that they have to pay attention to. In the same way, someone who practices religion, when they look at their being and their well-being as a whole, as a spiritual being, they realize that they need to do some kind of practice. So practice here, not because we're forced to do it. Practicing religion because you know why you're doing it. That is the first stage of the practical intellect. The next then is to go beyond. It is to go into cleansing the soul from impurities. And again here, it requires an understanding. It requires us to understand why we should develop ourselves as people. To realize that our true capital is who we are, not what we have. It is to realize that we have to go through a process. We are not going to be great beings doing nothing. We don't start there. We have to work on it. It is an everyday thing. And in fact, we only truly know ourselves through life experience. I remember I used to think I was a very calm person until I had children. I had one child, I realized I was not that calm. I had a second child and I realized I'm really not that calm. And then I had a third child and I realized I probably need some kind of therapy. Okay, so we realize through life. We go through life and life teaches us about ourselves. And as we learn about ourselves, we then have to start improving ourselves. We can't stand for just the way we are and in the normal state. We have to work on ourselves from every single day. And that will take us to a place in the future where we will be the type of people that we want to be. And that is the journey of self-purification. So that is the next step. And then the step after that is to illuminate the soul with knowledge. Now you might think to yourself, what does knowledge have to do with practice? So practice, we're talking about the practical intellect. We're not talking about the theoretical intellect. But the effect of knowledge is that it is immediate on practice. When you truly know something, you act on it. So for example, we might not be aware that a family member, for example, doesn't have food today. But as soon as we're aware, it immediately results in action. We will not We will not let that knowledge just be theoretical, right? Without immediately acting on it. And this is why in Islam, knowledge is practice. When you have knowledge, when you truly know something, it has the immediate effect of acting on it. They say that knowledge is something that is illuminated in itself and illuminates something else. So knowledge itself illuminates away from ignorance, but then it also radiates out into action. So when we get the type of knowledge that is useful, the type of knowledge that will enable us to progress, what we call al-ilmun nafi', useful knowledge, not data, not information, but knowledge that settles into our very being, it illuminates our soul. And as it illuminates our soul, we continue on this line of progression of the practical intellect, because that is the knowledge that guides towards the right kind of action. And then finally, as we have in the Islamic tradition generally, whenever we talk about self-improvement, whether it be in the tradition of ethics, whether it be in the tradition of mysticism, and of course here, as you can see, in a philosophical discussion as well, we always end with this stage of annihilation. The annihilation here is the annihilation of the ego, going back all the way to our first discussion of what it means to know yourself. Knowing yourself means getting rid of that alternate reality that you've created for yourself. And we've all created for ourselves. And in fact, we are predisposed to create that alternate reality. But as we move through all of these stages, we practice, we cleanse ourselves, we illuminate ourselves with knowledge, we move as much as we can away from our egos. Inshallah, maybe one day we will be granted the tawfiq to get to this point where we do have a clear vision of who we are. And we might experience that at times, but to really have it as an inculcated state is the goal of all of this improvement. We want to truly feel the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the deepest possible way. And in order to do that, we have to move away the barriers that prevent that. And of course, the ego is the most stubborn barrier. It is our own spider's web, our own fortress that we have enclosed ourselves in, and the hardest one for us to break out of. So annihilation here is that stage. And of course, the practical intellect is also affected by the theoretical intellect, as we'll see right now, and as we've also seen with some crossover there with knowledge. So now let's look at the stages of the theoretical intellect. When we're born into this world, we don't know anything. Yeah, we don't know anything about the world. We don't know anything about ourselves. We can think of ourselves as a blank slate. Yes, we have some natural inclinations, if you like, some natural reactions. So, you know, if light comes to our eyes, we'll close our eyes and things like that. But we don't have any kind of theoretical knowledge. We come and we need to learn everything. So the first stage of the intellect is an intellect that's devoid of all forms, all things that come to the mind once we have sensed them. We haven't sensed anything yet. This is, of course, is according to Mulla Sadra. Like I say, you can always have a debate with this. Perhaps you feel that there is some kind of knowledge in the womb. Perhaps the baby senses some things. These are all things that can be reformed with science. But according to their science of the time, according to how they understood the human being, your starting point is the world. And sometimes they also use this Quranic verse, which is that you are brought out of your mother's wombs and you don't know anything. أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا. He brings you out of the stomachs of your mothers and you don't know anything. So they also use that as an evidence as well. So as you come, you don't know anything. And then what happens is that due to your senses, you start to know things. You know faces. You know what things look like. You know what things smell like. You know what things taste like. And that produces concepts in your mind. Okay? And we continually, throughout life, collect these concepts. That's why we do things like travel. We travel so that we can get new concepts. We expose ourselves to new situations so that we can learn new things. We are constantly on that state where we learn new things, we see new things, and so on and so forth, and that gives us and endows us with concepts. So we move through life gaining these forms. But before we get there as well, there's also some things that we will know, which we call a priori truths or facts. Things like the greater is, the whole is greater than the parts, i.e., each part is smaller than the whole. Things like that. Then you move on to the stage, once you have all these forms in your mind, you can use them such that you can demonstrate things that you don't know. That's intellectual demonstration. And then finally, again, as you can see, we go into the more subtle and the more mystical, where Mulla Sadra says that the next thing that comes to you, once you know how to calculate and decipher things in your mind, is that you gain access to the divine kingdom. Okay? Now, when you hear that word, access to the divine kingdom, it's something that seems cryptic, something that seems foreign. And it's really important all the time to come and really reflect on what these things mean. Access to the divine kingdom, you've all done it. You might not know this, but you've all done it. When I talked about that inspiration in the time of Ramadan, what is that? That is access into the divine kingdom. That is the true sense and the true perception of spiritual truths. Yeah? If you've ever been to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca, done Hajj, all of those feelings that you have as you go through those journeys, that is all to do with access to the divine kingdom. It is not normal that any person with any beliefs or without any practice would necessarily feel that. Yes, many people do as well, because of the blessedness of those places and the greatness of those experiences. So this is what it means, access to the divine kingdom. Now, of course, it has levels, it has grades. If you pay more attention to something, you will get better at it. Okay? So the more you go through that practice and that becomes normalized for you. So say, for example, let's take Salaat again. The more it becomes normal for you to access the divine kingdom, meaning the more spirituality you feel when you pray, the more that will build. You will have further access, greater access to the divine kingdom. To the point, and this is, for Mulla Sadra, this is the point of creation. This is why you're made. You are made and you have all of this potential, because once you have access to that divine kingdom is vast. It is never ending. It is the kingdom of God. The human being is created for unlimited bliss. There's happiness, but we're not created just for happiness. We are created for unlimited happiness. Okay? And we have the potential to grasp and to hold and to have all of that happiness, which is why the human being is always searching. They're always searching for something greater. So the theoretical intellect, once it has access to the divine kingdom, it has access to great understanding. Okay? And that is really what the journey of religion is for, and the journey of understanding religion is for. And as religion becomes better understood, we as people become better. And that is here the intersection between the theoretical and the practical intellect. Okay. I've put here another slide just quickly situating Mulla Sadra within modern psychology. And the key point, I'm not going to deal with all of this here, but the key point is that because Sadra deals with the soul not as an isolated phenomena, but deals with it as something that is connected intimately with the body, such that the body is considered as a level of the soul. He avoids some of the key problems in the soul-body relationship. I put some of the other ideas over there, but I think in interest of time, we should skip. Okay, implications. Now, all of this discussion was to talk about how Mulla Sadra can contribute to a conversation on what Muslim mental health is, what Islamic psychology is, and perhaps also to conversations that are beyond that as well. So the first thing is that when we looked at the soul is on its own motion. And in its essence, it's immaterial, even though it has a connection with the body that is temporal. And so the soul is on a continuous progression, on a continuous, everlasting progression. And so therefore, when we intervene with the soul, when we try and affect the soul, those interventions should be something that is long-lasting, something that will have a true effect on the soul over a period of time. The next thing is that because we realize that we have a soul, we have to also cultivate that soul. That soul has to be cultivated alongside our material progression. At each and every developmental stage, there is something that is important for the body and something that is important for what is beyond the body. So when we think about how to cultivate the human being, we have to also think about the soul. The soul includes the mind, but it also includes what is beyond what we classify as mind, perhaps, at the moment. The next thing is, as we saw in the developmental stages, a child's soul is different from an adult soul. It is not as grown up as an adult soul. An adolescent soul is not as grown up as, let's say, an older adult soul, and so on and so forth. So because we have these different stages, we look again at different stages of development and how to deal with the souls in those states. The next one is that spiritual development is gradual as the soul is developing continuously. We cannot expect fast results. We have to have a gradual progression towards all of the things that we want to see within the soul itself. And the last one is that the soul, in a general sense, develops in two directions. And these directions, of course, are explained very clearly in the Holy Qur'an as well. We either go towards happiness or we go towards perdition and, destruction. And it depends on how we fashion the soul in this life. We will not just see effects in the hereafter. The hereafter, yes, of course, we will see visually, materially in front of us all of the effects. But these effects are things that we will sense in this world as well. So there are two broad directions as it pertains to the soul. So that is what I wanted to discuss in terms of Mulla Sadra himself. And now I just want to move on to the last part of our discussion, which is to start looking at Ashura and seeing how this framework fits into that discussion. Now, in the beginning, in the first lecture, I spoke about whether we should do this, whether we should use frameworks to look at Ashura. And as hopefully you have seen through this discussion of Mulla Sadra is talking about reality. He's talking about the world as it is. He's talking about the soul as it is. Sometimes what we might do when it comes to, especially the holy personalities, people like Imam Hussein, people like the martyrs of Karbala, we sometimes treat them as exceptions. We look at what Imam Hussein went through and said, well, of course he was okay with that. Of course he got through that. He was an infallible. He knew what was going on. He knew the greater good. He knew that he would be rewarded. And we devalue their human aspect. When you look closely at the history, what you will see very clearly is the human aspect. You will see the human emotions that they went through. You will see also that when we talk about something that's existential, we don't have exceptions. It is not the case that the Imam's soul is different to what we've been talking about when we're talking about all souls. Yes, when it comes to specific personalities, they are talented. They have almost a head start as it comes to certain things to do with spirituality. But that doesn't mean that that talent then negates everything else. I sometimes give this example. When I use the word talented, I use it for a reason. You and I, we might want to or dream about being great sportsmen. But there are some people in this world, because of their upbringing, because of their genes and so on and so forth, they have a talent for it. For all of the work we might put in, they don't have to put in as much work. And because of their talent, they're able to progress a lot faster. The same is the case, or similar is the case when we come to the infallibles. The infallibles had a lot going for them. And this is how they reached those very, very high levels that they reached. But that doesn't exclude them from the realm of a human being, because then we would have to have a discussion of what an infallible soul is like. Is an infallible soul essentially different from everybody else's soul? And if it is, then that's no longer a human being. That's another being with another type of soul. So because this is talking about the soul in general, the soul as it pertains to the whole of the human race, this is why we can look at the events of Karbala from this lens. And even perhaps if you're still uncomfortable with that, then at least the others who were present in the events of Ashura, at least the companions, when you look at them, you can apply these frameworks and understand them from that perspective. Now again, I'm looking here at the time, and I've hit my time. So I'm going to have to stop here, but we will, inshallah, on Shamaghariba night, go into this a little bit more, inshallah. So I'll leave it there for now. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
We have a few minutes for some questions and discussion. So is there any questions from the ladies' side first, please? Anyone from the gents' side?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your talk. I can't remember if you mentioned this in the first talk, but when you were saying about the we're born devoid of like intellectual thought, where does the fitra fit into that in terms of Mulla Sadra's philosophy?
Yeah.
And yeah, in terms of like our own inclinations and things.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, so there are some things that we know within the very fabric of our nature. But what Sadra is getting to here is in terms of conceptual knowledge. We don't have any conceptual knowledge. We don't have any conceptual knowledge because we have nothing with which to construct concepts. So you may know things. So for example, when a baby is born, they will know they're in a new circumstance, something they've never been. They'll probably know they're hungry, yeah, and things like that. But conceptual knowledge they don't have. So here, when we're talking about the collection of forms, it's talking about concepts. A baby will not be able to coherently put together concepts, and we can only really do that when we learn how to speak. Speaking is a sign of being able to juggle concepts. So thank you for that. That also helped me clarify as well.
Any more questions?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your talk. Modern thinking is that all mental health is related to neurochemical balance in the brain. You're unhappy because your body lacks serotonin. Let me give you a drug that inhibits the uptake of serotonin, and you'll certainly feel better. And it's demonstrated because that's exactly what happens. Let's not get into the side effects, but ultimately that's the effect. So we can see either from an organic disease and environmental mental health, there's a neurological or neurochemical basis for trying to understand what's actually happening in the brain. Are we saying then that to develop the soul is to perhaps affect that neurochemical balance?
See, the important part, thank you for your question first of all. With Sadra's thought, as you've seen, there is a very close connection between what is happening in the brain chemically and what is happening in the soul. So if you like to put it this way, the chemical releases in the brain are a effect of what is happening in the soul. Or if I put it another way, perhaps this way, the causal chain is from emotion to release. Yeah. Now, we can still use physical solutions for those issues, but perhaps what we're looking at with the Sadrian framework as well is that when we're looking more at the long term and the creation of a personality and the creation of, or if you like, the discussion of how we can improve our mental state over the long term, then we have to also think about the soul and how to improve the soul at the level above what happens on the physical plane. So this kind of discussion doesn't negate any of that information. Some people have. So some people who discuss the soul and the working of the soul might negate, you know, the use of drugs and so on and so forth to solve those imbalances and think of it only as a problem in the soul. But we don't necessarily have to do that. We can work with what is there scientifically and then also consider what can be done on the level of the soul, which for Islamic philosopher is considered to be more primary than the effect on the brain in terms of the chemical release. So I don't know. Yeah. But this is a field also needs a lot of thought. It needs a lot of input. It needs a lot of development. So these are perhaps just initial looks.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you for the lecture. I just want you to expand a little bit more on the effect of intellect and the practice of rituals. Because some people put like the cart before the horse. They do the salah and then they find that there is no effect on the intellect. Or they do fasting, but just they stop eating and drinking and there is nothing to follow spiritually. I mean, can you find something that, you know, make the people think, you know, the importance of that, please?
Thank you very much for that question. I think in the initial step, even the ritualistic practice of Islam, it does have an effect. But that effect is limited to the depth of the practice. It's like, for example, if somebody is to go to the gym to work on their muscles. If you go and you use a very light weight, it doesn't have much effect. You can do a light weight for a very long time and not see much of an effect. It does have an effect, but not much. But if you go and you lift weights in the appropriate way, the correct way, what you will see is over a very short period of time, there will be an exponential growth. And the same thing is as it comes to our ritual practice. Our ritual practice is supposed to be with concentration. Our ritual practice is supposed to be with meditation. Our ritual practice is supposed to be with our heart and our intellect engaged. If we approach our ritual practices without any of that engagement, that is like trying to move a weight without engaging the muscle. So it will not have that effect. And that's why sometimes we feel many years we've gone through ritual practice and we haven't been affected that much. We have been affected. The soul has been affected at least a little bit. And that's what's beautiful about the religion. But there is still more. Of course, if you perform those actions in a reflective state, in a state where your inner being is connected to what you're doing, then it has a much larger, tangible effect. The kind of effect that you know this is definitely having an effect on your personality, definitely having an effect on your soul. So I don't know, has this answered the...
I mean, and with your accounting background, is to make an audit with oneself.
Son,
To do these things.
definitely,
I mean, how much does it affect, how much I'm getting
definitely.
from this?
Definitely, that's a beautiful point. We always have to be aware of, you know, what we're doing and whether it's having the effect that we want it to have. Thank you also for linking that to my background as well.
Thank you very much, Shaykh Zoheir. We'll now move on to recount the events of Karbala.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. On the 9th of Muharram, the order to attack the camp of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was issued by Ibn Ziyad. As the army approached, Hazrat Abbas rode out to meet them, and he was able to defer them until the next day, so that the camp of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam could spend one more night in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Hussein had said to Hazrat Abbas, according to Abu Mikhnaf's account in al-Tabari, "Return to them if you can. Return to them. If you can, convince them to delay until tomorrow morning. Keep them away tonight so that we may spend the night in prayer to our Lord, to supplicate to Him and seek His forgiveness. For He knows that I have always loved praying to Him, reciting His book, supplicating to Him frequently, and seeking His forgiveness." The Imam offered his companions the choice to leave under the cover of night, and asked them to take his family with them if they did. But the men from among the camp refused to leave the Imam defenseless in front of an enemy bent on killing him, seeing no value to continuing living with such a burden on their shoulders. They were sure that laying down their lives to support the son of the Messenger of Allah was the right thing to do, no matter the extent of the suffering that they had to endure. According to one report in Illa al-Shara'i', the Imam then showed them their stations in paradise, and they spent their night in prayer and preparation until the battle the next day. Abu Mikhnaf recounts the state of Bibi Zainab on that night. On the evening of the day, and this narration is from Imam Zayn al-Abidin, on the evening of the day before my father was martyred, I was sitting with my aunt Zainab, who was tending to me, when my father withdrew from his companions and retired to his own tent. Huway, the freedman of Abu Dhar al-Ghaffari, was with him, preparing and aligning his sword. My father was reciting these couplets: "O time, away with you as a friend. How many dawns and sunsets have you had, at which your companions or seekers lay dead? Time will not be content with a substitute. The decision rests with the Majestic One. Ya dahru uffin laka min khalil, كم لك بالإشراق والأصيل من صاحب أو طالب قتيل الدهر لا يقنع بالبديل وإنما الأمر إلى الجليل وكل حي سالك سبيل." And the Imam repeated this verse and these verses 2 or 3 times. But it took that 2 or 3 times for Imam Zayn al-Abidin to understand what they meant. He said, "And I understood it and memorized its meaning, my tears choking me, but I forced them back and fought for calm. I knew that we were facing a great trial." What did these words mean? These words were the announcement of Imam al-Hussein that his death was imminent. My aunt also heard what I had heard, but she is a woman, and women are tender-hearted and fearful. She could not contain her anguish. She leapt to her feet and went to his side, with her robe trailing on the ground, and cried, "Oh woe, I wish death would release me from life. Today it is as if my mother Fatima, my father Ali, my brother Hassan have all died. O successor of those who have gone and refuge of those who remain." Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam looked at her and said, "O sister, may shaitan never take away your forbearance." She replied, "May my father and mother be your ransom, O Abu Abdullah. You are preparing for death. May I be sacrificed for you." Al-Hussein kept his sorrow in check, but tears filled his eyes. He said, "If the sandgrouse are left free at night, they will sleep." She cried, "Woe unto me, they will take your life by force, and that breaks my heart and grieves me even more." Tonight, I'm going to recite a tragedy, and it is a great tragedy because it was unexpected. While everybody in the camp prepared to fight the next day, this was not part of the plan of the fighting. Nobody could have mentally prepared for what was to happen. The martyrdom of an infant child of Imam al-Hussein has the power to shake a nation, but is only dimmed by the fact that it occurred in such tragic circumstances. In some reports, Imam al-Hussein had 6 sons, 2 of which were named Abdullah and Ali Asghar. One was a nursing baby and the other was a child a few years old. Some historians have opined that the infant who was martyred on the day of Ashura was another child born on that day. The child was maybe born on that day, and therefore it was important for the Imam to see him. This was not supposed to result in a martyrdom, but the enemy bore such hatred towards the Imam and was so eager to crush his spirit before he fought, that they took the opportunity to fire an arrow at the heart of the Imam through murdering his infant in his arms. The account that I will recite is from is from Al-Malhuf. The Imam came to the doorway of the tent and said to Zainab, "Bring me my young son so that I may bid him farewell." The child was brought, and he lifted him so as to kiss him. At that time, Harmala ibn Kahil shot an arrow at him. The arrow lodged in the throat of the child, killing him. The Imam said, "O Zainab, take him." And then he gathered the child's blood in his palms until they were full, and threw the blood towards the heavens, saying, "Whatever happens to me is easier to bear, because it is witnessed by Allah. هون علي ما نزل بي أنه بعين الله على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين صلاة على محمد وآل محمد."
Salawat. In Karbala he sacrificed everything he had. In Karbala he sacrificed everything he had. Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. Who would have thought one afternoon is all that it would take for Hussein to sacrifice his house for Allah's sake? His body in a state that we can't even comprehend. Imam Sajjad watched helplessly the women to defend. Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. He heard Abbas's call and towards him he raced. What could prepare him for the scene that he was going to face? All that he could see was the dampness on the sand before. His arms were lying helplessly scattered upon the floor. Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. He came to speak to Abbas, motionless he lay. How unbearable must it be to see him in this way. The only consolation was the iman in his heart, knowing that his brother and master weren't too far apart. Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. Now it was the turn of Akbar to go and boldly fight. The spear hit his chest and the pain it did ignite. His call was answered by Hussein, who found him on the sand. How hard it was to pull the spear out with the father's hands. Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. His family lay about the sand, for help he did call. The only one to answer it was his infant so small. He takes the baby in his arms, his lips are dry with thirst. The mother watches from her tent, let her mala be cursed. Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. His bringing back the baby, will his pain not decrease? He lost this little soldier and his heart has lost its peace. The sand rejects his blood and the sky spurns it too. What strength does it require to see his mission through? Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. To bury his little son, his strength it must consume. The time then came to bid farewell to Zainab and Kulthum. Sakina lies on his chest and started to grieve. Her request to the Imam was, Father, please don't leave. Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. Allah, what a mighty heart your Hussein had. Salawat. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein.
What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? How did you cope with this great torment, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see when the alarm fell, when the water spilled? What did you see when the alarm fell, when the water spilled? Where are those hands of Uncle Abbas, his mission fulfilled? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? Did you see the tiny cradle shake, hearing Halmin? Did you see the tiny cradle shake, hearing Halmin? Where is your brother Ali Asghar, his life to begin? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? Did you see On and Muhammad fight, so brave and bold? Did you see On and Muhammad fight, so brave and bold? For Allah they sacrificed their lives, the truth to uphold. What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did Qasim call out as he fell down to the floor? What did Qasim call out as he fell down to the floor? If only Shah could see his young son martyred in war. What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? Did you see on Sham-e-Ghariba, tent set alight? Did you see on Sham-e-Ghariba, tent set alight? Did you see your Auntie Zainab stand on guard that night? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad? What did you see on the battlefield, Imam Sajjad?
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, wa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا حجة الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا حجة الله هيا على الصلاة هيا على الصلاة هيا على الفلاح هيا على الفلاح هيا على خير العمل هيا على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله